You're listening to Two Bobs, conversations on the art of creative entrepreneurship with David C. Baker and Blair Enns.
Blair, today we are going to talk about the 10 legit, maybe we're too old to say legit, the 10 legitimate ways to cheat.
Too legit to quit? Is that still a thing?
No. I am interviewing you. You will remain silent until I tell you to speak. Okay?
Yes, sir.
10 legitimate ways to cheat at your positioning. But I have to say, this one bothers me. I'm such a believer in positioning. The notion of helping people to cheat bugs me. And I meant to buy a buzzer, like a really obnoxious basketball game buzzer, so that if I hear any crap from you, it was going to go off, but I couldn't. I'm going to have to simulate it. But the other thing I want you to know is that if you don't acquit yourself during this podcast, it's going to be known as the one Bobs moving forward.
Okay.
You accept?
All right, I'm on trial. Let's do this.
Okay, so...
And if the gloves don't how is it? If the gloves don't fit, you must acquit? Okay, I don't know. Let's pretend I didn't make any of these bad jokes. Let's get into this.
Okay, so the idea is you either aren't ready or you don't believe in the idea of a tight positioning, but you'd like some of the benefits. Anyway, these are some hacks or some legitimate ways to cheat at that positioning. I want to remind people before they go down this path of the three particular advantages that you talk about in this subject for great positioning. Those three advantages. First is a sales advantage. So I want you to just give me a few sentences about what you mean by the first benefit of great positioning would be a sales advantage. And then we're going to ignore these three things and we're going to talk about the 10 hacks here.
Yeah, well, let's talk about the first two together, a sales advantage and a price premium. And strong positioning should allow you to command both simultaneously. So a sales advantage is just simply that you win more often than not. When you come up for an opportunity that's within your sweet spot, your area of focus or your area of specialization, then you usually win. There's a high percentage of the time you're the winning firm. And the second point, at a price premium, you win while charging more. So you win not on price, not by cutting price. You're able to command this premium price and still win. So that means your scene is meaningfully different because a price premium, it kind of signifies a few different things, but ultimately it's the big indicator of how different, meaningfully different you are seen to be from your competitors.
Yeah.
So you win while charging more.
And impact the buying process. You did a really interesting study a while back about the role of impacting the buying process and the impact that has. So just summarize that for our listeners today.
Yeah, so the more meaningfully different you're seen to be, the greater impact that you can have on the buying cycle. So that might look like pushing back on a client's kind of arduous or flawed or sometimes outright ridiculous selection process. So you might say, Mr. Client, instead of responding to the RFP blindly, as you suggested, we think a better next step would be we sit down with the decision makers and have a conversation about a fit, and we'll see if it makes sense to take a next step from there. So gaining access to decision makers when you're told access isn't allowed, getting them to change their process for you, all of that is a sign of how meaningfully different they see you to be. In the brief study that I did on it, I'm not going to remember the statistics, but essentially, if you don't impact the buying cycle in some ways, your odds of winning are about 1 in 8. If you moderately affect the buying process, then your odds of winning are greater than they are of losing. And if you significantly affect the buying process, and you get to decide what does moderately and significantly mean, or at least those in the study did, if you significantly affect the buying process, your odds of losing are really only about 4 or 5%.
Wow.
So if you significantly affect the buying process, you are almost a lock to win the business. So these things become important. They're indicators of how much power you have in the buy-sell relationship. And that power is really only comes from one place, and that is your positioning. How meaningfully different are you seen to be? And then we could talk about leveraging that power, because some have power and don't leverage it. That's a whole other topic. But those are the three primary benefits of a well-positioned firm.
So what we're doing is we're talking today about how if you value those three, then how you might achieve them without making the hard choices, doing the hard work of positioning. These would be ways to cheat towards a good end for you. So there's 10 of these. We're going to have to move through them fairly quickly. First one is to add a strong perspective.
Yeah. So let's say the way I look at your positioning is discipline for market. So what do you do and for whom do you do it? Those are the two primary elements of positioning. But the third element, it's kind of that higher level after defining discipline for market, because you might decide that you do marketing for pharma or physician retention for hospital systems. That's pretty specific. But those are two examples of discipline for market. So marketing for pharma, that makes you a pharma expert or specialist. But how many other firms are also in that space, marketing for pharma? So there's at least dozens, right?
Yeah, 30 or 40, I would think.
Yeah, 30 or 40 firms in that kind of direct competitor space to you. So how do you set yourself apart from those other competitors is you add a strong point of view, which we refer to as a perspective. So it's your overarching viewpoint on how this marketing for pharma should be done. And that's really your secondary level differentiator. So when you've maybe made some compromises in the first level, you've chosen branding for corporations.
Yeah, you love the branding word. I can tell by how warmly you describe that.
Yeah. You've chosen something really broad. You can, my point here is you can get away with a broad discipline for market if you add a strong perspective. In fact, if your discipline for market does not describe kind of a nice, clean area with little competition density, so that's taking into consideration the size of the market and the size of the number of competitors. So if it doesn't do its job there, if you've got a lot of competition density after proclaiming your discipline for market, then it's incumbent on you to add a really strong perspective, a polarizing perspective. If you've done a really good job on discipline for market, then you can get away with a weaker perspective, or maybe not even having a perspective at all if you're kind of 1, 2, 3, 4 firms in a space. But the more dense the competition is in your space, the more you are required to have a strong perspective to polarize the audience. And what you want to do is you want your audience who's reading your thought leadership or listening to your speech or listening to you being interviewed on a podcast, you want them to be lean forward and to be drawn into your point of view. So I often say about thought leadership, people will read for the X for Y, discipline for market, the knowledge that you're going to impart on X for Y. But they hire you for your point of view. They hire you because you believe what they believe, or you look at things the same way that they look at things. And the implication is that's a narrower, more unusual way than most people. Or you've got a really unusual point of view and you convert the reader to your point of view. So that's what we're trying to do with a strong perspective, and it can make up for an otherwise weak positioning.
Okay, great. Number 2 is to define and market different practice areas. Before you explain that, I would like you to speak to whether this replaces like the generalist firm's website. Would they have multiple websites, one for each of these, or are they in addition to? So talk about that as well after you've explained it.
Yeah, you could do that different ways, the multiple highly specialized practice area websites, or you could have basically bottom up or top down, or you could have the big agency brand up top and then the specialist areas underneath. So I don't think there's just one way to go about that.
But the idea is the prospect would see themselves more specifically somehow in your marketing presence. So like you haven't made this big courageous choice over the whole firm, but you've been more specific as they dive in so that they see themselves more readily. Is that a fair description?
This is really a mechanism for those larger firms for whom it really does not make sense to specialize.
Okay.
So it might be the larger global agencies or the larger, maybe not so global agencies who are kind of the generalist firms who have, good, lucrative, deep relationships with a bunch of different clients in different areas. Just look at the business and ask the question, does it make sense to break this up into different specialized practice areas? And when you do that, whether you have dedicated websites to those practice areas or not, is one thing, but if they don't have dedicated websites, there should be dedicated sections on the websites. And the other thing I would say is you need to have somebody who is the visible leader to the outside world of that practice area. Does that make sense? And when those practice area definitions are real, then you start hiring for those practice areas. If you're not hiring for those practice areas, they're not real. That means you're just a small firm trying to get away with a broad positioning. So this is really only a hack that's available to the larger firms.
Okay. And sometimes those larger firms will refer to this not just as a practice area, but also from the prospective client's standpoint, a category experience as well.
Yeah.
All right. Third is launch a new entity. Are we back talking about smaller firms at this point or not necessarily?
Size isn't really an issue here, although the smallest firms don't really need to think about this. Having said that, I know some small firms who have launched specialist entities. It's really a way of hedging your bet about you've got this idea, and we see this in our training program all the time. In fact, I'm doing a webcast for the folks in our training program on this very subject next week. It's called Project Skunkworks, the hows and whys of launching a separate brand. And so let's say you're a generalist firm and you're going through the positioning part of our program, and you arrive at a really novel and narrowly focused positioning. You get really excited about it, but the fear is also just too massive because it's so specific. It's so specialized compared to your current client base. You might have clients, good, well-paying clients in a variety of different areas, and now you're proposing to specialize in a new area. So it's a way of launching the new entity without freaking out your current client base, but usually those concerns are overstated.
Right.
So it's really a way of launching a new specialized entity without freaking out yourself.
Gotcha.
Right? So you keep the mothership, as it were, same brand, same website, et cetera, and then you launch a new specialized brand that might specialize in property marketing or pharma or healthcare or whatever it is.
And you would develop separate insight that follows that particular focus and publish it along with that and so on to build credibility with that.
Yeah, and in most cases, the idea is once you validate the specialized entity, then the mothership will kind of slowly go away. You basically shift all of your efforts to the new entity, and you let the mothership, the old generalist brand, just kind of run its course, and then one day in the future, you just shut it down. And the exception might be if the specialty you're choosing is in a high-risk area. There aren't many high-risk areas. Property marketing is the one that comes to mind. You might keep the generalist firm open and doing business under that banner just to mitigate the risk that comes with being in a space where all spending stops once there's any type of economic downturn. So that would be the one exception I can think of.
I've heard some people react to this idea by saying there's no way we can maintain two marketing plans. And then if they stop and think about it a little bit more, they realize, we've never had a marketing plan for this generalist mothership anyway. The work has just come to us, which is why it hasn't been at a price premium. We haven't impacted the sales process, all those things you talked about at the beginning. So it's really about having one, for the first time, really serious marketing plan over at this other venture on the side. Yeah,
and you put all of your new business and marketing resources behind the new specialized entity. So the old one is still there, but you're not doing anything to further it in terms of chasing business under that banner. If business comes in under that banner, that's fine. You're free to take it. But you focus all of your efforts moving forward on the specialized entity.
Okay. Fourth one is to cop an attitude. Cop an attitude.
Yeah, this one is related to a perspective. So a perspective is your overarching belief on how this should be done. But an attitude is really a tone. And there's something, I think you and I both know firms who, when they publish something, some thought leadership, we read it because it's great reading, not so much because of we're interested in the subject area or even their point of view, but the way they write, the boldness or something. I don't know exactly where to put this, but attitude is a factor, right? It speaks to confidence, which draws people to you. So if you have, and I can't even define it more than this, if you have a compelling attitude, there's just something about that draws people to you. And that is what I would call a legitimate cheat, right? You wouldn't try to build your business around. This isn't advice you should go out and try to replicate. Like some of this advice is, as we get further down, it's a little bit tongue in cheek. But it might explain why you're successful when external consultants like you and I, David, look at a person's firm and think, I have no idea how you're succeeding with a positioning like this. Part of it might just be attitude.
Yeah. I was a guest on a podcast recently that's called Everyone Hates Marketers. And that's an example of an attitude. The firm that runs this podcast is a very small firm in Ireland. And they had Seth Godin on the podcast a couple of episodes before me. And I'm thinking that's got to be partly the explanation for why somebody like Seth Godin would be on Everyone Hates Marketers, because it's a very specific topic or point of view. It's copying an attitude. Plus, of course, Seth Godin would also believe in that notion too. So this is related, but it's pretty interesting. Can you think of some examples of firms that would portray this attitude? It doesn't have to be a mean attitude. It could just be a very specific attitude.
I'm a big fan. I've done some work with this firm. You've met one of the partners as well. He's come to an event we did. Velocity Partners in London, or just outside of London. They're in the content marketing business. I think their creative director partner, Doug Kessler, is probably the best content marketing writer out there today, maybe one of the best advertising writers. I could read their stuff all day long. He's got this article, and he's done a presentation. I think he was at Inbound a year that you and I were speaking there, but I didn't get a chance to see him. How to lie in your fucking marketing. So he just cops this attitude and writes well. That combination is really compelling.
Yeah. And now you made me want to go listen to that one. Now, of course, you just threw an E on the description of this podcast.
You could bleep it out
too.
with a buzzer you don't have.
You're listening to Two Bobs, conversations on the art of creative entrepreneurship. Your hosts are David C. Baker of Recourses, author, speaker, and advisor to owners of expert firms, and Blair Enns of Win Without Pitching, the sales training and coaching program for creative entrepreneurs. For more information, go to twobobs.com. If you find this podcast helpful, please help us by telling a friend and rating us on iTunes. Thank you. Now back to David and Blair.
All right. The fifth one is to sell on how you do what you do. So I guess more about process or the how.
Yeah, and we get into the sketchier ones here as we get further down the list, and we're on number 5 here. You need to watch out with this one because you really shouldn't be selling on how you do what you do other than late in the sale. Early on, the buyer is overweighting the benefits of change, and later on, they're overweighting the costs or consequences of change. So they're quite nervous, and your job is to calm them down. That's where methodology comes in. When you kind of lift the kimono late in the sale and say, all right, let me explain to you how this is going to work. And the reason you explain how this is going to work is you're trying to prove that you have this demonstrable, repeatable process. That's not a hack for your positioning, because positioning is supposed to be effective at the front end of the funnel. It's supposed to drive opportunity to you. But it can be a hack sometimes when it is tied to something we talked about earlier, which is having a point of view or a perspective. In fact, I would say we could talk more on this. We don't have much time, but any methodology that you have that you would unveil late in the sale to calm down a nervous client, it really should fall out of your overarching point of view if you've been able to articulate one. So if you are leaning on that earlier point, I think it was the second cheat or hack of having a strong perspective, a strong point of view, then it's really kind of incumbent on you to actually prove that you bring that point of view or that perspective to bear once you actually start doing the work. And that's what I mean by sell on how you do what you do. So if you're using that earlier one of you've got a novel point of view, you almost have to be able to pay this off later in the sale. Now, the mistake a lot of firms make is they invent this proprietary process that's usually quite meaningless, and they put a TM or an R ball, pay the money and register the trademark next to it. And then they put it on the front page of their website and they say, we are the XYZ process agency. And thinking that that's not going to do it. I'm really talking about building on a perspective and paying it off later in the sale. So you can be a really broad generalist and have a strong point of view that can draw people to you. And then once you're into the conversations in the sale, you can open up the kimono, so to speak, and prove that this is how we're going to bring that perspective to work for you if we work for you. That combination of those two things can be powerful and can overcome a weak positioning.
Okay, gotcha. Number 6 is to build mystique. You were talking with me about this a while ago, and you pointed me to this website. I don't know if you remember or not. This was the firm in New Zealand, but I presume that this would fall under this.
Yeah. Alt Design Group in Auckland, New Zealand. And I don't know these guys. I've traded a couple of emails with one of the principals. I hope to be down there in the next 4 or 5 months and to go in and see them. But I'm a massive fan of their website. I forget the URL. I think
it's altgroup.net.
Altgroup.net. So How many words of content would be on your website, David?
Oh my God, it's like a terrible version of Wikipedia. It's too
well
much.
Over 100,000, right?
It's well over 1 million. Yeah.
Really?
It's way too much. Yeah.
Yeah. So there are a lot of words on your website. You go to Alt Design Group's website and it says this page intentionally left blank. And then there's some contact information. And I would just have a glass of wine in the middle of the night and in my kitchen, everybody else has gone to sleep. It's all dark. And I would just pull up that page and look at it and go, yeah, that's what I want.
How long do you think it took him to write that phrase? I picture weeks of editing sessions and diagrams.
It's the title of a book on graphic design, yeah. So I don't think it took them a lot. But the idea is that this firm is built on the idea that the most powerful thing in marketing is a rumor. So there are all kinds of rumors associated with Alt Design Group. And you can Google them and you can hear the stories, and people have there are all these stories that get traded about how they win business and how they turn away business and how hard it is to get them to work for you, et cetera. And who knows how true these are or are not. I'm hoping to find out. But the mystique is really powerful. So clients seek them out because of the mystique. So are they properly positioned? No, it's nothing but mystique.
It's a 14-year-old boy in New Zealand. Yeah.
Yeah.
Okay. So the seventh is to sell integration, but you're making a distinction here. You're selling real integration. Talk about what that means.
Yeah, so this is where we get into the area of, this is the 7th of 10 hacks or cheats for your positioning. And this is where this is theoretically possible, but you don't see it very often. And I'm not sure I can call to mind any credible examples of this, but I do know they're out there. I just don't see them very often. The idea of an integrated ad agency or an integrated communications firm, and somewhere around 15 years ago or so, this IMC was big, integrated marketing communications. It was kind of like a new full service thing that was taking off as a saying, and then it just kind of flamed out and you don't hear it anymore. But the idea is that an integrated firm takes many of these different specialties, and then somehow with some sort of magic sauce, they stick them all together and make the whole greater than the sum of its parts. But the problem is integration is usually, or historically has been, a phrase that is used by generalists trying to communicate the message that no, we're actually a bunch of specialists. So this is a tongue-in-cheek hack. I would say for most of you, don't use it, but I do want to acknowledge that it's theoretically possible.
But it's possible if you're a larger firm, right? Because you're going to have the personnel necessary to credibly build out these different arms and legs that make up the whole body. Is that right?
Yeah, you could probably do this with about a 30-person firm, I think. So it doesn't have to be really large, but you can't be really small either.
Yeah, it's just not true at that point. That's why you put real in parentheses as we're describing this real integration.
Yeah.
Okay, 8th is to sell deeper into existing clients.
Yeah, your firm doesn't have to be well positioned if you don't have this steady need to always bring in new clients, right? Now, there's some risk associated with having the same clients for too long, but if we look at the flip side of the problem is you bring in a new piece of business, you do some work for the client, then they go away and they don't come back. They may come back for another project years down the road. Then you think of the firms where they're like black holes. A client goes in and never comes out. When I was working in the agency business, whatever market I was in, there's always some firm who was like that. Man, a client goes in there. If they start working for that client never leaves because they have mastered a deep relationship, and beyond just a relationship, I'm not trying to minimize what's going on here. They're crawling into all the cracks, the niches, the crevasses that are in that client, right? They're mining that client in a way and to kind of a level of detail that most other firms don't. And some firms, they're just built on this.
They're not going to leave the mine until everything is gone, right?
Yeah. I like to say another metaphor is they're like a virus going into a computer. They go everywhere, right? But the better metaphor is they're not leaving the mine until every nugget has been mined.
There's an example of what agencies are doing here that I've seen crop up more frequently now than ever in the last at least 4 decades, and that's staff augmentation. And it's a nasty business to be in. So in other words, they are leasing employees to their clients. It's a nasty business to be in the sense that it's very hard to maintain a position of expertise. It's very difficult to maintain your culture when you have employees, quote unquote employees, spread out at other clients. But in every example of the firms that I've worked with, and I've worked with more than a dozen intensely, they are making way more money from staff augmentation than they are making from traditional agency or creative services. And they're reluctantly doing it, honestly. But when you look at who's subsidizing whom, the staff aug is subsidizing everything else in these agencies. And it's an example driven largely by the fact that I think at the Fortune 1000 levels, they have all of these it's unfortunate, almost artificial body count mandates where they simply cannot expand their staff. And it costs more to do it. That's what's so crazy. But they go out and hire these other employees on a staff aug basis.
It's just created this entire new industry. And if you look at the larger consulting companies, they're built on this, right?
Right.
They go in and you hear stories of clients saying to the consultants, like, you guys came in for a project 8 years ago.
We can't get rid of you.
And now you're everywhere. They're completely intertwined. In those cases, a lot of the institutional knowledge of the client company is actually held up in the agency or in the consulting company. If you've been intertwined in a company for 6 to 8 years and the average tenure and the average position in that firm is 2 years, then you are the holder of the institutional knowledge. Therefore, you're invaluable.
Yep. All right. Number 9, because we only have 2 more here, is to mine for referrals. And again, this is in the context of like if your positioning isn't fantastic, these might be some ways that you could minimize that impact. So mine for referrals.
Yeah, similar to number 8, if you don't have this really pressing constant need to bring in new clients all the time, because the new clients come to you not for reasons of what we would say classic positioning, but because of relationships, because you're essentially doing good work. But beyond that, I think that's the last point that we'll talk about. Beyond that, you have mastered the art of asking your clients for referrals. And I've met very few principals or firms who have mastered this art. And it's actually one of the dark arts that we at Win Without Pitching, we're working on it now. I've been saying we don't have a novel point of view on referrals, and we've been working on it for a long time. We've been talking to all the people in the referrals business. We're reading all the books. And I don't know that there's anything there. I don't know that I can bring anything novel to the table beyond like these 3 points of do good work, say please, and say thank you. I don't know that there's much beyond that. Like be referable. These are 3 points that I get from Strategic Coach. They've distilled it down to this. Be referable, say please, ask for the referrals, and then say thank you in different ways. So I think there are different levels of nuance you could bring to each of those 3 points. But the big one is just creating a habit around asking. And some firms, and it's usually individuals within firms, and it's usually the principals, they've just mastered this art. So they don't have to do all of the marketing that others do. And there's downsides to leaning exclusively on referrals. There's not a lot. But if you get better at asking for and getting referrals from your clients, then that will take all kinds of pressure off of your positioning.
It seems pretty obvious to me that the degree to which you want more of the same kinds of clients you have is the same degree to which this will work, right? If you're trying to upgrade your clients, the referral path is not going to be as accessible to you because they think they know what a good client is and they're going to bring you more of those. And if you don't have great clients already, it's going to be tough. All right, the 10th one is to be awesome. And are you writing a Hallmark card here? Be awesome because we know we're more awesome than other people. Does it mean to be more awesome than other? Everybody thinks they're awesome. Generally.
Sounds like I got under your skin with this one a bit.
My hand is hovering above the buzzer here.
We've yet to hear the buzzer. So I said, as we get lower down the list, some of these are a little bit sketchy or maybe even tongue-in-cheek. First of all, I'll say that of the 3 points that I listed for cheat number 9, mine for referrals, the first point is be referable. So first of all, you have to do good work, right? And I want to point out that if you're really good at what you do, forget your positioning, forget the claim of expertise that you take to the market. If you just happen to be really good at whatever it is you do, no matter how kind of broad you've spread yourself, that's the first step of A, keeping clients, and B, getting referrals. So it's a legitimate hack. I think I put it here because I want to speak to the point that that's just something that we should all strive for. It's just really an issue that's a level of quality. And I don't know how much you in your consulting practice and me in our training program, how much time we spend trying to make the firm a better firm. I think we spend some time on it, but the better the firm is, the better the quality of the work, then the less pressure there is on positioning because the lower turnover of clients. Now, having said that, I think we've talked before, if we haven't, we'll talk at some point about the fact that there's a certain amount of client churn is healthy. Right. So it doesn't take all of the pressure off. And there's a reason it's number 10. It's like I'm poking a little bit of fun at some of the people who essentially neglect the hard work and difficult decisions that come around choosing a focus in the marketplace, around positioning their firm, and just think that we're just going to be awesome. So on one hand, that's a slightly ridiculous notion. On the other hand, we should all be striving for a certain level of awesome, because if we're not at that level of awesome, we're going to churn through our clients fairly quickly, and we're going to find it difficult to get referrals.
Thank goodness that clients have a preference for different styles. That's why there are so many agencies, right? Every agency thinks they're special. All the clients think the agency is special, and they have this mutual love for each other. And that's kind of what makes this world work, right? So it's
all rainbows and unicorns, man.
Yeah. All right. The next episode of this podcast will be called One Bob's, and it's been very nice to have you as a guest for a few episodes. I am taking applications, so. Yeah. Thank you, Blair. Appreciate it.
Thanks, David.
Thank you for listening to Two Bobs with David C. Baker and Blair Enns. Subscribe and learn more at twobobs.com. That's the number 2, BOBS.com.